So about a month ago, me and many other people who cover, Resident Evil on YouTube as a whole, covered a potential leak that happened just before Village released. If you don't know what that was, essentially about a month or two before Village launched, there was a big leak at Capcom that revealed a bunch of things, some of which was about things that happened in Village, which all ended up being true. So this was not like a leak quotation marks. This was an actual leak that happened. And alongside those things, which again were 100% accurate, there was leaks of a potential another Resident Evil game launching at the end of the year called Resident Evil Outrage. Of what details there are of this game, it was meant to come out, it's meant to come out at the end of the year. It is going to be a timed Switch exclusive, apparently. So it'll be on Switch for a certain amount of time exclusively, and then we'll release on consoles later on. And would follow a couple of beloved characters from the mainline series, and who they are is Rebecca Chambers, who you know as one of the playable characters in Resident Evil 0, and she is also in Chris's campaign as his side character in the first game. And then the second character would have been Leon, which is a huge deal because people love Leon. He hasn't been in the games since 6. Obviously, the animation came out long ago, which is very good, so I recommend you watch that. It's quite enjoyable. But he hasn't been in the games in a while, which is a big deal. Now, in terms of details for the game, there's not massive amounts, but from what we have, it seems to suggest that this will be Revelations 3. If you know what Revelations games are, there is 2 of them right now. And to kind of sum them up in a brief kind of way, they are separate stories that kind of bridge time between certain entries in the series. I believe the first one is set between 4 and 5, or 3 and 5, and then the second one is set for a fact after 5. So obviously after 5 and maybe after 6 as well. Not too sure, but either way, they usually sit in the middle of a couple of releases, and the story itself is kind of separate. But characters you play as are familiar. Like for the first game you play as Jill, the second game you play as Claire, which is, again, beloved characters. So it makes sense that, Rebecca and Leon are in the next one. And they're also co-op games, which is interesting. Third person as well, to keep that in mind. So if this does come out, it will be a nice change back to how it was with third person instead of first person, which 7 and 8 have been. But now you're all caught up with the situation that happened. If you want more details about that, I'll leave a link to the video I first made about it down below, which is covering basically all the information you would need to know about the game, and covers everything that we know so far and what it could be like. But today what we're going to do is, due to a recent information that I've kind of been given through comments on YouTube, I'm not sure if it's 100% true, but I have kind of looked up what the guy said, and it does seem to be the case that this Revelations game will be set either between 7 and 8 or after the events of 8. And that does kind of pose the question, what could the story be? And I have a couple ideas of what they could go with for the story, especially considering the small yet escalating subplots from 7 and 8. So I'm going to go over that in this video today. As always, if anyone else has any ideas what the story could be, or what they would want the story to be about, by all means, drop them down below. But this is just 2 ideas I have which they could take the story with, so without any further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, so first up, and this is probably the more likely one, if there was any. At the end of Village you find out, and this is obviously spoiler territory for Resident Evil Village, so if you haven't played the game or finished the game, do not watch this part of the video, I'll let you know now. At the end of Village, you find out that when the BSAA turned up to kind of deal with the mutant monster outbreak and Miranda and stuff like that, instead of sending in elite soldiers to deal with it, they sent in bioweapons. Now, if that's our context, don't worry, I'll explain. The BSAA is the group that Chris formed way back in Resident Evil 5 and is a part of throughout 5 and 6. And essentially what they were is anti-bioterrorist team. They would go into areas that would potentially have bioterrorism going on in them and deal with it. Obviously that's the whole point of 5, it's kind of the whole point of 6, and it's very prominent throughout Chris's story. Okay, and then finding this out at the end, Chris is obviously aware that this has happened because his team has one of the bodies on the helicopter they escaped with, and they kind of look zombified. Obviously, he just say this is a bioweapon, this is not a person. At the end of Village, he says he needs to go to the BSAA headquarters in Europe and kind of like confront them about it, kind of get some revenge for what happened and kind of make people pay, like make the responsible people pay for what they did. It is obviously a big deal in terms of the storyline because the BSAA has been part of the games for a long time now, and having them kind of go against what they kind of fought against is ridiculous. Like, there's so many weird plot lines going on with the games in a minute, with the New Umbrella, which is obviously, the original bioterrorist group in the first place. They caused the outbreak in Raccoon City. And now they're kind of this organisation that's kind of promising to make up for what the old Umbrella did by kind of going out and dealing with any bioterrorism that turns up. And now to have the whole thing switched around, where Umbrella seem to be the good guys and the BSAA seem to be the bad guys, is very interesting. So what I would think would be pretty cool, and this could be set after 8 or between 7 and 8, is you play as Rebecca Chambers. Obviously that's the main character of this game apparently, and she is a BSAA member. You find that out later on. Obviously in Resident Evil 1 she's part of STARS, and then later on you find out through an animation show she's in, and some backstory throughout some of the games, that she is now a team member of the BSAA. And what you could do is have her kind of either watch it all unfold or kind of investigate what's going on with them, because obviously if she's in contact with Chris, or let's say Leon is supposed to be in the game, he's in contact with Chris, they would be aware that something is wrong with the BSAA, and then maybe there's the story arc could be to kind of find out why it's happening and what's going on. This could lead to kind of some internal fighting. From what I believe, the massive leak of location seems to be that she's dealing with an outbreak of a virus on like a campus, just like a rage virus or something like that. That was kind of the small leak about what was actually happening in the game, but maybe that was caused by the BSAA to keep her quiet, because maybe she's investigating them. Who knows? Maybe Leon's trying to help her. I think that idea would be pretty cool, because it could either flesh out that kind of story in prep for Resident Evil 9, if that is the main story they want to go for in that game, which I'll be covering in a week or so about the 2 potential storylines for Resident Evil 9. But we could either flesh out the information as to why the BSAA is kind of going against themselves, or it could kind of cover that whole storyline in general, up until the point where Chris gets involved. Maybe he turns up in that game instead of 9, it's completely separate. But it's such an interesting story arc for me, because I want to know what's going on, because the Umbrella, the new Umbrella, kind of the blue Umbrella, isn't really prominent in Village. By the end of 7, it really is. Like, it's a big deal, especially in the Chris DLC. He isn't really on board with working with them, but he knows that he's going to have to try and get used to it at the same time. And they didn't really mention it in 8, really, so I'm interested to see what's going on there. But now with the BSAA kind of switching roles and being the bad guys, or what we would see as being bad at the minute, it's just interesting to see where that will go. But that is the first idea I have for the potential story for Revelations 3 Outrage, whatever you want to call it. Now the second idea I have is probably more fitted for a kind of sub-game, unless of course they kind of want to put some more emphasis onto this story in RE9. And that is with the Connections group that Mia is involved with. Obviously you find out at the end of 7 and slightly through 8 that Mia is part of a group of people called the Connections, and you do not know much about them other than the fact that they tried to kind of... Alright, backstory time again for Village, so again, spoilers. Miranda's daughter died a long time ago, and Miranda is obviously kind of special because she doesn't age or die like normal people, because she has the mutant virus inside of her. But she's been trying forever to get her daughter back to life because she died, and she's been trying to use the mutant and stuff like that to find hosts that are suitable to do that, and was not successful at all. Hence Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, all those people. So she went to the Connections to kind of work with them to try and do it, and they kind of did it, but then Evelyn happened. Like, that was the failed experiment, essentially. Evelyn was not what they thought, and she ended up being a pretty disastrous bioweapon. She's very dangerous, as you find out in Resident Evil 7. And the connections are responsible for her making. So, in all simple terms, Mia is a bioterrorist and was working with a bioterrorist group in Resident Evil. And obviously at the end of 7 Star Village, you find out that she's willing to work with Chris to kind of bring these people down. But in terms of who the connections are and what their goals are, we don't know. So it would be cool if, maybe it falls in the hands of Rebecca and Leon to find out who these people are and what they're doing. And in doing so, and in getting close to figuring out who they are, that's when this kind of rage virus idea people have going on takes place, and you have to kind of find out who caused it and who the connections really are. Do I think the connections will have some kind of reference or involvement with other enemies in the game? It's very possible. Are the characters going to be involved with it? It's very possible. I don't know if it will be the case because it's a new thing completely, but if there's one thing that Resident Evil has been doing quite well recently, especially with 7 and 8, is having like these twists and turns in the storyline. Again, I won't mention any specifics, but they're very good. A lot of the story for the village isn't perfect, and the main reason for that is really Chris. Unfortunately, his whole kind of suspiciousness throughout the game wasn't necessary, but apart from that, the story is quite fine. But the twists they have, especially with Ethan and Mia and stuff like that, is very well done. It's very cool, and they could do that with the connections and make them more involved than you think, or they could just be a new group of kind of good, kind of bad people, like doing bad things for good reasons type deal, or who knows what. But I would love to see some more information and some more story revolving around the connections. I do feel like, because from what people have said, and I believe what Capcom have said, the Winters storyline is a trilogy, and obviously 7 and 8 are the first two, and 9 being the last in the trilogy, will end the story of the Winters. So maybe the connections is a big deal for their story arc, and maybe you'll kind of play as Rose and kind of track those down. But it could be mentioned and dealt with in Outrage, Revelations, whatever you want to call it, and it would be cool to see. But those are my two ideas, of course. Now they're big ideas, obviously. This is not a mainline title, and it could be done. It would make the game a lot more of a bridge compared to the other Revelations games, because, like I mentioned, the first two Revelations games are in a way their own kind of separate stories, but making a game like this where it does actually bridge the gap directly between the mainstream titles would be pretty cool to see. But as always, let me know your thoughts on this. Again, there's no information officially as of right now. It's just based on leaks and what we've seen so far. Again, this was taken from a big company leak, and what people said in this leak about Village. Everything that was mentioned about Village in that leak is true. It was true. Like, the main thing they kind of mentioned from that leak is there is a dragon boss about halfway through the game, and halfway through the game isn't accurate really. It's not the first couple of hours, but nevertheless, they did leak a dragon boss, and that is in the game. And there was a point where it said you take control of Chris for a while, and again, that is in the game. So I would say it's quite trustworthy that this game is coming eventually. Whether it's been delayed or just hasn't been announced yet, we don't know, but it's probably coming at some point. But that's going to do it for this video. Again, do let me know your thoughts on this Outrage game and what you want to see from it. Personally, there's a lot they could do with it. It could be a completely new thing as well, which would be really cool. If you are interested in more details about the game specifically, and talking about more of how the game would play and stuff like that, I'll leave a link to the first video I made on this in the description. Check that out, and it has a lot more information about what the game could be rather than kind of discussing the potential story of the game. But yeah, it's gonna do it. Leave a like if you enjoyed, obviously, and subscribe if you are new for more Resident Evil content. Video every day, streams every weekend, and I'll catch you all tomorrow for another video.